The University of Missouri at Columbia is the largest university in the state of Missouri. Hundreds of thousands of students from across the country and abroad attend the school. The Missouri campus is considered a relatively safe area with a low crime rate, perhaps because the majority of residents here are students. Many students often walk home to their dorms alone after studying late at night in the library. The police in this area also do not have to deal with the kind of dangerous crimes that are common in big cities. Most of the calls to the police are for typical student problems such as noise from parties or public disorder. However, that all changed on the morning of June 5, 2004. That morning, groups of students were on their way to school. A group of friends were walking past a row of apartments when they saw a man lying on the grass between two buildings. He was lying on his back, wearing only blue shorts, and his shirt was bare. First, they thought it might be a student who had passed out after drinking too much the night before. However, when they got closer, they realized the young man was dead. Police quickly arrived on the scene. First, they thought it might be an accident. However, after examining the body, they quickly ruled out the possibility. It was clear that it was a homicide. It appeared that the victim had died from a slashed throat, and blood was everywhere. The victim was quickly identified as 23-year-old Jesse Valencia. Jesse was born on February 22, 1981, in Perryville, Missouri. Jesse grew up with his mother, Linda Valencia, stepfather, Lupe Valencia, and two younger sisters. Friends and family described Jesse as a free-spirited, happy-go-lucky person who loved life and was always willing to help others. As a teenager, Jesse told his mother that he was gay. Linda has always loved and supported her son, regardless of his sexual orientation. Linda said that when he was little, Jesse often said he would die young, but couldn't explain why. At the time, Linda thought it was just something a kid would say, so she didn't pay much attention. Jesse grew up to be a handsome and charismatic young man. He was a male model for many fashion brands after graduating from high school. However, Jesse later decided to go to college at the University of Missouri at Columbia. In 2004, Jesse was a senior in law school. He wanted to become a lawyer. Jesse seemed to be having a great time in college. He was popular and had a lot of friends. He was always busy between studying at school, working at a motel, and partying all night with his friends. Jesse was also openly LGBT and good-looking, though he always had some kind of relationship. However, despite having many friends and even a sexual partner, Jesse was not ready for a serious relationship. Jesse worked at a motel on the evening of June 4th. After his shift ended, he went to a party and drank quite a bit. When police checked the call records on Jesse's phone, they discovered that his last call was to a man named Ed McDevitt at 3:13 a.m., lasting 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Detectives immediately questioned Ed McDevitt. Ed admitted that he and Jesse had slept together. Ed said that they had last been together 2 nights before. On the night of Jesse's murder, Ed said that he had gone back to his apartment, and his roommate could testify. Ed's roommate was Eric. Eric admitted that he saw Ed come home around 1 a.m. However, when police looked at Eric's record, they found that he had been in trouble with the law several times. Eric had been arrested for drug trafficking and theft. Eric also told the police that he did not like Jesse and did not care if Jesse was murdered. The police were suspicious and obtained a search warrant for Eric's apartment and took his DNA sample for testing. However, Eric had a solid alibi, and the police found nothing suspicious, so he was soon ruled out as a suspect. The forensic results showed that Jesse died around dawn, right where his body was found. The knife used to cut Jesse's throat was a serrated knife. Surprisingly, Jesse did not have any defensive wounds on his hands. Usually, when victims are attacked with weapons, they tend to use their hands to block or shield themselves. This made the police feel very confused. However, the forensic results later showed that he had been strangled first, and the victim was unconscious when his throat was cut. Jesse's apartment was a block away from where the body was found. When detectives went to check, they found his door unlocked, but no signs of unusual disturbance. Underneath the clothes, investigators found a used condom and sent it to a lab for testing. The DNA on the condom belonged to Jesse and Ed McDevitt. Police also collected DNA from under Jesse's fingernails and discovered that it included DNA from Jesse, Ed, and a third unidentified individual. Police began questioning all of Jesse's friends and neighbors, asking anyone with information about the night of the murder to come forward. One neighbor reported hearing a fight around 4 a.m. on June 5th, but did not go outside to investigate.
Somebody stumbling and kind of bumping into the wall, like, stop it, you know.
Another neighbor reported seeing a young man walking around sobbing on the morning of Jesse's murder. However, the most important clue came from another student named Andy Schermerhol. He said that he and Jesse were friends with benefits, a relationship based on friendship and sex, but no love. It was simply a relationship of two friends who were willing to sleep together, but had no emotional attachment, no responsibilities, no jealousy, no control over each other, and they treated each other as friends. Jesse was clearly a young man living freely in an open relationship with no strings attached. Jesse and Andy met a few months ago and had sex a few times. However, the last time they slept together, something strange happened. It was the middle of the night, and the two were lying in bed when suddenly there was a knock on the door. Jesse wrapped a towel around himself and opened the door. Outside was a police officer in uniform. He held a flashlight and entered the apartment. Andy was startled when he saw the police officer. He quickly sat up and wrapped the blanket around himself. However, to Andy's shock, the officer told Jesse and Andy to go ahead. Jesse reassured Andy and said he knew the officer, and the officer went to bed with them. After having sex, the officer got up and quickly got dressed. He made Jesse and Andy swear not to tell anyone about this. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the officer disappeared into the night. Unsurprisingly, the police officers were extremely worried when they heard this story. It was very likely that the killer was one of them. It turned out that Jesse had told his mother about his secret relationship with the officer, but he had never told her the man's name. At first, Jesse seemed excited and enthusiastic about this secret relationship. However, after a short time, the excitement began to fade, replaced by fear and suspicion. Jesse always felt like he was being watched. Andy was immediately asked to go to the Columbia Police Department to identify the officer who came to Jesse's apartment that night. They gave Andy a photo album of all the police officers who worked at the Columbia Police Department. However, Andy said that he did not need it, as the officer had just walked past the hallway a few seconds before. That officer was Steven Rios, 27 years old. Steven was a patrol officer working at the Columbia Police Department for 3 years. He was married. His wife's name was Libby Rios, 21 years old. Two had a beautiful love since high school. Both had stable jobs and were loved and respected by everyone. They had a dream wedding. Libby had also just given birth to a son 4 months before the incident. Steven was one of the first police officers on the scene, and he was also the one who helped identify Jesse. According to his colleagues, Steven was a well-liked and respected member of the police force. His superiors trusted his ability, and his colleagues respected him. Steven was described as ambitious and a stickler for rules. Needless to say, everyone was shocked that a seemingly moral and decent man like Steven could have such a dark secret. Jesse and Steven first met about 2 months before the incident. Jesse had attended an all-night party at a friend's house. They were drinking and making noise. so the neighbors called the police to break up the party. Stephen was one of the police officers. Jesse was drunk at the time and fought back and got into an argument with the police. Eventually, Jesse was arrested by Stephen and charged with intentionally resisting a law enforcement officer. However, this was the beginning of a strange relationship between students and police. After the fight at the party, Stephen waited for Jesse to arrive at the train station. On the way, Stephen struck up a conversation and asked personal questions. The day after the party, Stephen showed up at Jesse's apartment unannounced. Stephen said he had some questions for Jesse. What he really wanted, however, was sex. Over the next 2 months, Stephen would occasionally knock on Jesse's door unannounced, and the two would sleep together. According to a friend, Jesse was upset that Stephen had promised to help expunge Jesse's criminal record, had not done so. After this revelation, Stephen was immediately questioned. He initially denied everything, but after confronting Andy, he admitted to having sex with Jesse. However, Stephen denied any involvement in the murder and claimed that he was home with his wife that night. Stephen agreed to provide a DNA sample to compare with the DNA found under Jesse's fingernails. It was a match. The third individual who had not yet been identified was Stephen. However, this finding did not prove that Stephen was the killer. The relationship between Stephen and Jesse, although immoral, was not illegal. After being questioned, Stephen was released. When the medical examiner re-examined Jesse's body, he noticed large bruises on his chest and between his shoulder blades. These bruises indicated that Jesse had been restrained with a chokehold technique commonly used by police, called a unilateral chokehold. The purpose of this technique is to render the restrained person unconscious for a few seconds. A police specialist examined the bruises on Jesse's body and agreed that it was likely that the bruises were the result of this restraint technique. However, it appeared that the technique had not been performed properly and that Jesse had fought for his life, so the bruises appeared larger than normal. Investigators reviewed Stephen's police record and discovered that he had failed a defensive tactics course during his training. This added to the evidence against him. In addition to the bruises on Jesse's chest, the medical examiner found several small black hairs that did not belong to Jesse. They turned out to be arm hairs. Some of the hairs were still attached by the roots, so investigators believed they might have come from the killer's arm. During the struggle, DNA testing showed that the hairs belonged to Stephen. On the night of Jesse's murder, Stephen left the police station at 4:47 a.m. after sitting on the rooftop talking with his colleague. Stephen's wife, Libby, testified that she woke up at 5:15 a.m. to warm milk for her baby. Stephen returned home about 10 minutes later, at about 5:25 a.m. Stephen's house was about a 15-minute drive from the police station, which meant he had about 20 to 25 minutes to commit the crime. The prosecution argued that, on the night of Jesse's murder, Stephen showed up unannounced at Jesse's apartment, as he often did. However, Jesse had decided to end the relationship with Stephen because Jesse had just discovered that Stephen was married and had children. Jesse threatened to tell Stephen's superiors about their affair if he did not leave Jesse alone. Stephen was furious. He did not want to end the affair, and he did not want his family and co-workers to know. Stephen quickly became aggressive, forcing Jesse to run outside to get away from him. But Stephen chased after him, grabbed Jesse from behind, and put him in a chokehold. The two struggled for a while, but Jesse eventually lost consciousness. In a fit of rage, Stephen slit Jesse's throat and fled. Stephen's attorney urged the jury not to confuse adultery with murder. They argued that Jesse had sex with many people and could have been murdered by any one of them. Stephen's wife, Libby, filed for divorce, but she still testified in court for Stephen's innocence. Libby claimed that Stephen came home that morning without any signs of anything unusual. police uniform he wore that night was also searched, but there was no blood on it. The attorney also argued that the police never found a murder weapon in his car or home. Stephen's car was also thoroughly searched, but there was no trace of blood. They argued that Stephen could not have committed the crime without blood or any scratches on him. In addition, it took more than 4 minutes from the police station to Jesse's apartment and nearly 15 minutes from Jesse's apartment to Stephen's house. This means that Stephen only had about 20 to 25 minutes to argue with Jesse, chase Jesse for about 200 meters, attack him, then dispose of the weapon, and get in the car to go home. The defense attorney argued that this was impossible. Stephen's attorney also argued that Stephen often went to see Jesse at midnight during work hours, so why did he go to Jesse's house at 5 a.m. when his wife was waiting for him to come home? Furthermore, the arguing sound that the neighbor heard was around 4 a.m., at which time Stephen had not yet left the police station. In addition, who was the young man sobbing nearby? There are still many unanswered questions in this case. However, 24 members of the jury did not agree with the defense attorney. They found Stephen guilty after 2 separate trials. The judges found that there was too much forensic evidence against him, and that his motive for the murder was undeniable. Stephen was sentenced to life in prison for murder, plus 23 years for the armed assault charge. As of 2024, Stephen is still in prison and has never pleaded guilty. To this day, Stephen's family, ex-wife, and ex-in-law are convinced that he was wrongly convicted. However, whether Stephen is guilty or not is still a matter of debate. If you have heard of this case before, please share your opinion below. Do you think Steve was wrongly convicted? And who do you think was the real culprit that the investigation agency could have overlooked? Finally, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming mysterious cases.